cultural and behavioral change which has happened in people's mind and in their lifestyle too. So how these outside forces and trends are impacting the consumers in the industries as a whole, and what are the emerging trends for marketeers right now? I mean, in the digital and in offline space.
Good question, Devleena. Now, see, for any marketeer, the most important thing is to really understand how people are feeling and how they are doing, right? If you are able to get the pulse of these two areas, it is possible to build a marketing strategy, right? Because the marketing strategy is finally about communication, it's about activation, it's about innovation, right? And all of these three components, they really pan out in the lines of, how do you really respond to the consumer, right? Now, in terms of communication, I think what I saw last year, right, is that as we go through various phases of the pandemic, right, there are different passion points that become relevant. So, when you have the early phase of the pandemic that we saw somewhere in March, April last year, and again March, April this year, when there is a fresh shutdown, right, there is an immediate state of confusion. People are really wondering what's really going on. And companies that play reassuring messages which tell them to focus on the basics, they tell them that, basically it's about home hygiene. I think these are those communication passion points that become relevant, right? As we get into the pandemic and people start getting a little comfortable with, which we saw somewhere around July, August last year, and again probably should pan out in the next couple of months, right? When people realize that, we cannot go out in a hurry, but I need to make the most out of this time, right? So there, when companies talk about spending time with their families, or talking about new cooking shows, so that because in-home dining has to make up for the lack of entertainment outside, suddenly those communication passion points become relevant. Yeah. And then as we get out of a pandemic, when there's a sense of relief, like when you have the new normal which was sort of setting in November, December last year, and hopefully that should only be quicker this year. So unless something like that happens, right, you will have people again wanting to get some revenge shopping back, some discretionary purchases going, tending to wanting to really celebrate some small moments again, and then again it will be the time for optimism, right? Again, brands which are able to be cautiously optimistic. I think those are some of the communication passion points which sort of move on, right? So I would say from a consumer trend standpoint, there is one role for communication which I just talked about. The other role is for innovation. Now, in innovation, I think it's very important for marketers to be very careful, because innovation is a tool that can make companies and it can also break companies. Because if you go out there and do all kind of unreasonable innovations, you will not have the money to support your core, you will not have the money to support your innovations, and you could land into a tough situation, right? But in such a scenario, I would say, I have full compliments for companies like, Reckitt Kaiser, Lifebuoy, which took their existing product lines like hand sanitizers and personal hygiene, and they were able to ramp up production to really satisfy the needs of the consumer, right? So that, I would say, was a good job done. You also had a lot of companies launching a slew of new products, which I'm not very, excited about, where you had, immunity as a buzzword, and you had, juices which promised immunity, or you had something else, right? I think those are flash in the pan. I don't see them, really making much of a wave. It felt like a PR gimmick, right? Companies like Dabur from Dabur Honey and Chyawanprash, I think they surely benefited, because they had a product which was relevant before the pandemic. It became even more relevant during the pandemic, right? And hence there was a role for initial communication, or really figuring out further product recipe modifications to sort of satisfy consumers further, right? And the last thing that I talked about was activation, right? Now, when it comes to activation, I think it's very important for companies to realize one thing. The only way to damage yourself during a pandemic is to stop communicating. I think the companies which didn't do well through the last year and probably this year is those who hunkered down and said, "Boss, I don't know what's going on. Let me stop my investments." I think that's a recipe for disaster, because what the consumer wants is to interact with you. So your activation means might change. Instead of making big budget IPL campaigns or big budget Bollywood releases, you might start focusing on digital. You might start focusing on OTT. You might have a lot of Bollywood celebrities wanting to Instagram influencers now, right? So hence, what changes is not whether I should activate or not, but rather how should I activate? What is the most relevant way of doing it? How can I be sensitive, empathetic during this time?